What if a single moment of instinct, worth less than a breath in time, transformed an ordinary waitress into the unexpected guardian of a billionaire dynasty? As the wealthiest man in the state watched helplessly while his toddler tumbled from the crystal-adorned balcony of Le Maison restaurant, Shanice Carter, exhausted from her third double shift that week, lunged through air thick with gasps and champagne mist, her weathered hands capturing the falling child mere inches from certain tragedy. Time froze in crystalline suspension as Shanice Carter clutched the trembling child to her chest, his tiny heart hammering against her own while chaos erupted across Le Maison like wildfire through dry brush. Screams splitting the perfumed air as tables toppled and champagne flutes shattered against marble floors in the mad rush of onlookers seeking better vantage points to record the miracle on their phones, their jeweled fingers stabbing at screens with frantic urgency, while security personnel shouted for calm amid the pandemonium that transformed the five-star establishment from dignified opulence to circus spectacle in mere seconds, leaving Shanice dizzy beneath the constellation of camera flashes that turned night to blinding day around her confused form as she whispered gentle reassurances into the sobbing child's ear, her calloused fingers stroking his silken blonde curls with instinctual tenderness despite the hurricane of noise and motion threatening to sweep them both away, the boy clinging to her faded uniform with surprising strength while tears carved glistening trails deep on his cherubic cheeks and dampened the polyester fabric already stiff with spilled cocktails from her 12-hour shift, her mind still struggling to process the impossible sequence of events that began with the horrifying sight of a small body pitching over the ornate balustrade and ended with her arms full of wiggling, very much alive child whose father now burst through the crowd with terror etched across his aristocratic features, Maxwell Pierce, founder of Pierce Enterprises and 20th wealthiest man in America according to Forbes, his custom Italian suit rumpled and $1,000 tie askew as he skidded to his knees before Shanice with none of the dignity that normally surrounded him like expensive cologne, his manicured hands reaching for his son with desperate gratitude, blooming into sobbing relief when the boy launched himself from Shanice into his father's embrace, their twin heads of golden hair pressed together beneath the fractured rainbow light of crystal chandeliers worth more than Shanice would earn in 5 years of double shifts and overtime. The breathtaking splendor of Le Maison with its hand-painted ceiling murals and gold-leafed moldings suddenly appearing grotesque in its excess as it framed this raw human moment between father and son, while just beyond this tableau, Vincent Hargrove, the restaurant manager whose perpetually pinched expression had intimidated Shanice since her first day 3 years ago, pushed through the spectators with thunderous demand for explanation, his voice cutting through the commotion like a freshly honed blade only tea. Oh, falter and fade when Maxwell Pierce looked up from his son with tears streaming unchecked down his face and extended one trembling hand toward Shanice, his voice breaking as he whispered words that would alter the course of her life, though she could barely hear them above the roaring in her ears. The contrast between her scuffed service shoes and his handmade Italian loafers as stark as the difference between their worlds, a chasm of privilege visible in everything from the softness of his unscarred palms to the confidence with which he occupied space. Yet, in this fragile moment, power had shifted in ways neither fully understood as cameras continued to flash around them, capturing the unlikely savior in her coffee-stained uniform, still frozen in disbelief at what her own body had accomplished on pure instinct alone. Friends, before we go further, may I ask a small favor? Please subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us keep bringing you these stories, and reaching 1,000 subscribers soon is so important for us to continue. We also love hearing from you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see how our little storytelling circle is spreading across the world. And if you enjoyed the beginning, give this video a like, and let's share thoughts on the whole story together below. The employee break room hummed with frenzied energy as Shanice sank onto the torn vinyl sofa, her hands trembling like autumn leaves in October wind, while her mind replayed the terrifying trajectory of the falling child in endless loop, barely registeri, nung the excited chatter of co-workers who buzzed around her like honeybees to their queen, peppering her with questions. She lacked the energy to answer, as the adrenaline that had propelled her impossible leap now drained away, leaving exhaustion in its wake, her muscles aching from the sudden exertion, while Tanya from desserts pressed a paper cup of lukewarm water into her still quivering fingers, and Miguel from the kitchen repeated that he had caught the whole thing on his phone before, being interrupted by the thunderous sound of the break room door flying open with such force that it bounced against the water-stained wall, revealing Maxwell Pierce filling the doorframe with his imposing 6'3" frame, still radiating the barely contained energy of a man who had nearly lost everything most precious to him, his presence immediately silencing the room as Vincent Hargrove appeared behind him, stammering about employee-only areas and company policies, only to be dismissed with a casual backward wave of Maxwell's manicured hand that carried the unquestionable authority of someone accustomed to bending the world to his will. His laser-focused attention never leaving Shanice as he crossed the cramped space in 3 confident strides. The custom Italian shoes that cost more than her monthly rent, now standing on the same stained linoleum where she had nursed countless blisters and swallowed quick meals between tables. The contrast between his tailored suit and the dingy surroundings with their flickering fluorescent lights and ancient microwave caked with years of splattered food making visible the invisible infrastructure of service workers who created the illusion of effortless luxury for patrons like him, yet he seemed not to notice the peeling paint or smell of old grease as he lowered himself to one knee before her with surprising humility and produced a thick cream envelope from his inside pocket, pressing it into her hands with earnest insistence as he explained in a voice thick with emotion that no amount could repay what she had done, but he hoped this might help with anything she needed, the substantial weight of the envelope making her stomach clench, with longing as unbidden calculations raced through her mind of past due rent notices, collection calls from credit cards maxed out on her mother's medications, and the experimental treatment doctor Lou had mentioned that insurance refused to cover, yet even as these desperate needs screamed through her consciousness, Shanice found herself gently returning the envelope to his manicured hands with quiet dignity that momentarily confused his expression, her soft explanation that she had only done what anyone would do meeting his incredulous stare as he insisted that was categorically untrue. Most people would have frozen or simply recorded the tragedy rather than risking themselves, his genuine bewilderment at her refusal revealing the vast gulf between their worldviews as completely as the physical contrast between his monogrammed cufflinks and her chipped nail polish, momentarily rendering him speechless before his phone erupted with incoming calls that he silenced without looking, his thoughtful gaze lingering on her face with new curiosity as he reluctantly pocketed the envelope and retrieved a platinum business card instead, pressing it firmly into her palm with unexpected warmth in his voice as he insisted this conversation was not over, the heavy weight of the embossed card remaining in her hand long after he departed, leaving behind the lingering scent of expensive cologne that seemed jarringly out of place among the break-room smells of burned coffee and yesterday's leftovers. The lock on apartment 412 always stuck in humid weather, requiring Shanice to throw her weight against the warped door while simultaneously twisting the key and lifting the handle, a nightly frustration that barely registered as she finally stumbled into the narrow hallway illumina, ted only by the blue glow of medical monitoring equipment, spilling from the converted living room where her mother had spent the last 14 months, confined to a hospital bed that consumed most of their limited space, necessitating the relocation of their meager furniture so that the couch now blocked half the kitchenette and the television balanced precariously on a stack of plastic storage bins containing the remnants of her mother Loretta's former life as a kindergarten teacher before the aggressive lupus had ravaged her body beyond recognition, leaving her once vibrant form now skeletal beneath threadbare sheets while tubes and wires connected her to machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical indifference to the financial catastrophe they represented, each day adding hundreds of dollars to medical bills that already exceeded what Shanice could hope to earn in 3 lifetimes despite working morning shifts at the local diner, afternoon hours entering data for an insurance company that ironically denied most of her mother's claims, and evening service at La Maison, where tips from wealthy patrons barely covered their monthly prescription costs, even before considering rent or groceries or the occasional power bill that went unpaid until final notices arrived with threats of disconnection, a precarious financial juggling act that left her perpetually exhausted yet unable to rest as she now moved through their tiny apartment with practiced efficiency, checking monitors and adjusting medication doses while recounting the evening's bizarre events in the deliberately upbeat voice she always used, regardless of her true emotional state, her mother's sunken eyes widening with astonishment as Shanice described catching the falling child, though she intentionally minimized the danger to herself while emphasizing the boy's adorable gratitude, carefully avoiding mention of the refused money that could have erased their most pressing debts, because such knowledge would only distress her mother, whose condition was exacerbated by emotional strain. Their conversation interrupted by the ancient television suddenly blaring with breaking news, as the regular programming cut to a live press conference where Maxwell Pierce stood before a forest of microphones flanked by corporate logos, flashbulbs, his voice reverberating through their tiny apartment as he praised the remarkable young woman who had saved his only child and heir, announcing with practiced gravitas the establishment of the Elliott Pierce Foundation dedicated to supporting underprivileged families facing medical hardships, the cameras panning to his adorable son, perched on the hip of an elegantly dressed woman who must be his wife, the picture of family prosperity and corporate benevolence that struck Shanice as surreally disconnected from her reality as she simultaneously measured liquid medication into a syringe while calculating which bill might receive partial payment from her next check. The contrast between the polished press conference spectacle and her cramped apartment with its water stains creeping across the ceiling, and collection notices stacked on the kitchen counter, highlighting the vast distance between their worlds despite their momentary collision earlier that evening, her mother reaching for her hand with paper-thin fingers while whispering that perhaps angels still walked among men, Shanice simply nodding with exhaustion as she settled onto the threadbare armchair that doubled as her bed, Maxwell's confident voice still filling their small space with promises of generosity and change, while her alarm clock already warned that she had less than 5 hours before needing to rise for her morning shift at the diner where regular customers waited for the coffee she always remembered to pour exactly as they preferred without being asked. Morning sunlight streamed through the towering windows of La Maison, transforming the pristine tablecloths into fields of blinding white that Shanice navigated with practiced precision despite the bone-deep fatigue weighing her limbs after just 3 hours of fitful sleep. Her arrival greeted, not with the usual casual nods from fellow servers, but with strained silence, punctuated by meaningful glances that followed her path to the locker room, where Kimberly and Jasmine abruptly ceased their whispered conversation when she entered, their normally friendly faces now masked with artificial smiles that never reached their eyes. As Kimberly pointedly mentioned, she would have taken the money and vanished to a beach somewhere, Jasmine adding with unmistakable accusation that some people clearly thought themselves too good for financial help while others struggled without playing savior, their words landing like precise knife thrusts that Shanice pretended not to feel as she donned her uniform and proceeded to the morning staff meeting where Vincent Hargrove publicly announced her reassignment to Section 7, the notorious dead zone tucked behind a structural column with tables no customer requested unless every other section overflowed. His thin lips curved into what might appear to outsiders as a smile, but communicated clear punishment to everyone familiar with restaurant politics, particularly as he simultaneously welcomed the journalists gathered at the bar with effusive hospitality and hints that exclusive interviews might be arranged with the right incentives, his pointed ignorance of Shanice carrying unmistakable message that her 15 minutes of fame would not translate to workplace advantage under his authority, a reality that crystallized as she spent the morning serving businessmen who recognized her from overnight news coverage and requested selfies while leaving insultingly small tips, accompanied by unsolicited advice about leveraging her sudden fame, her phone vibrating constantly with interview requests and social media notifications that she had no time to address. While navigating the suddenly treacherous landscape of workplace relationships transformed by jealousy and resentment, longtime colleagues now deliberately bumping her tray or failing to inform her when orders were ready, while others attempted to insert themselves into her spotlight by loudly reminiscing about witnessing the rescue to impressed customers, the familiar rhythm of service work now discordant and hostile until mid-afternoon, when the hostess seated a striking woman at the corner table of Section 7, with evident reluctance that suggested the guest had specifically requested this undesirable location. Everything about the newcomer, from her perfectly tailored charcoal suit to her minimal yet obviously expensive jewelry, communicating wealth and influence despite her understated presentation, her observant gaze tracking Shanice with unsettling intensity between occasional notes in a leather-bound portfolio while declining anything beyond sparkling water and a simple salad that remained largely untouched during the 2 hours she occupied the table, leaving behind a tip equaling 300% of her modest bill along with a business card tucked discreetly beneath the leather folder, bearing only a phone number engraved in elegant script without name or company affiliation, an enigmatic gesture that registered as simultaneously generous and vaguely threatening as Shanice pocketed the card alongside the identical one from Maxwell Pierce while bussing the table herself, since Miguel now claimed not to notice when her section needed clearing, the weight of both cards burning in her pocket as tangible reminders that her simple act of human decency had somehow catapulted her into unfamiliar waters where she found herself unable to distinguish between opportunity and danger, her once comfortable workplace now transformed into hostile territory where former allies viewed her with suspicion and strangers watched from shadows with unknowable intent, leaving her isolated precisely when she most needed allies. Rain pelted the cracked asphalt of Le Maison's employee parking lot with percussive intensity as Shanice hurried toward her ancient Honda, keys clutched in weary fingers, while mental calculations of remaining gas versus distance to her next shift at the diner occupied her thoughts until movement between parked cars registered peripherally, sending instinctive alarm through her exhausted body, as a slender figure emerged from shadow into the weak illumination of the single functioning lamppost, revealing the mysterious woman from Table 7, now sheltered beneath an elegant black umbrella that she wordlessly extended to cover Shanice, as well, introducing herself with quiet confidence as Vivian Pierce, sister of Maxwell and Chief Operations Officer of Pierce Enterprises. Her direct approach and lack of social pretense momentarily disarming Shanice, who had expected the typical condescension she encountered from wealthy patrons, rather than this straightforward intensity that suggested Vivian valued time too. Highly for meaningless pleasantries, rain drumming against the taut fabric above them, as Vivian explained her presence with unexpected bluntness, stating that Pierce Enterprises needed people with uncompromising integrity rather than wealth seekers and sycophants, offering Shanice an executive assistant position with salary sufficient to cover her mother's medical needs, plus benefits that included comprehensive health care without waiting periods for pre-existing conditions. The specificity of this last detail, revealing that Vivian had thoroughly investigated Shanice's personal circumstances in ways that should have felt invasive, yet somehow came across as respectful preparation, water pooling around their feet as Shanice automatically began declining the offer, while explaining her responsibilities to co-workers who relied on her to cover shifts when their children fell ill or cars broke down, her loyalty to fellow service workers clearly surprising Vivian, whose analytical expression softened with what might have been approval before she shared her own unexpected history of growing up in Detroit public housing, putting herself through community college while working 2 jobs until a junior accounting posy Asian at Pierce Enterprises 20 years earlier, had provided her opportunity to demonstrate exceptional talent for financial analysis, her subtle emphasis on certain details communicating to Shanice that the polished executive before her understood intimately what it meant to count pennies for bus fare and choose between meals and textbooks, their shared background creating unexpected connection as rain continued falling around the small dry circle containing their intensifying conversation. Vivian lowering her voice despite the empty parking lot as she revealed concerns about financial irregularities within the charitable foundations operated by Pierce Enterprises, specifically patterns suggesting significant donations never reached intended recipients, but disappeared through elaborate accounting mechanisms she had been quietly tracking for months without sufficient internal allies to properly investigate. Her need for someone beyond the influence of established power networks becoming clear, as she explained, the position would provide Shanice with access to records typically restricted from executive view, while her public profile from saving Elliot would justify her unusual placement within the corporate structure, the parking lot gradually emptying of other employees who hurried past with curious glances at the unlikely pair engaged in intense conversation beneath the single umbrella, neither woman acknowledging the increasingly suspicious scrutiny from Vincent Hargrove, who lingered by the service entrance pretending to secure the door while obviously straining to overhear their exchange. Vivian finally producing a business card identical to her brother's except in silver rather than platinum, pressing it into Shanice's palm with quiet insistence that she consider the offer carefully before making any decision, while adding in undertone that should she accept, they must establish communication channels outside company monitoring systems, the cryptic warning hanging between them, as Vivian finally stepped away with professional nod that transformed into barely perceptible conspiratorial smile before she disappeared into a waiting luxury sedan with tinted windows, leaving Shanice standing alone in gradually increasing downpour, clutching two identical yet fundamentally different invitations to a world she had never imagined entering, rain mingling with unbidden tears of exhaustion and confusion as the enormity of choices before her suddenly collapsed, the careful compartmentalization that had sustained her through months of grinding struggle. Fluorescent lights cast sickly pallor across the institutional beige walls of Dr. Liu's cramped office as he reviewed Loretta's latest test results with clinical precision belied by genuine compassion in his tired eyes, medical terminology flowing in steady stream that Shanice had learned to translate over 14 months of similar consultations. Phrases like progressive deterioration and treatment resistance gradually coalescing into devastating clarity that conventional approaches were failing, while her mother's systems continued shutting down despite maximum intervention. Each word landing with physical impact as Shanice maintained the calm, attentive expression she always wore during medical discussions regardless of internal turmoil, nodding with practiced composure as Dr. Liu reluctantly introduced possibility of experimental immunotherapy protocols, showing promising results in similar cases but classified as investigational by insurance companies who categorically denied coverage, the unspoken price hanging between them until Shanice quietly requested specific figures, the number Dr. Liu finally wrote on his prescription pad containing so many zeros that it momentarily appeared abstract rather than representing actual currency required to potentially save her mother, the amount exceeding her lifetime earning potential in service industry even if she worked every day without breaks for decades to come. Yet she thanked him with genuine appreciation for his honesty. Before collecting the information packets he offered with robotic efficiency that carried her through hospital corridors and into the parking garage, where she finally allowed herself 10 precisely counted minutes of silent tears before compartmentalizing emotions and driving home through early evening traffic with mechanical focus that prevented total collapse. Arriving at apartment 412 as sunset gilded the shabby building with temporary beauty that failed to disguise its fundamental disrepair, her mother already asleep under influence of pain medication that increasingly failed to provide adequate relief, the quiet apartment suddenly overwhelming with visual reminders of their previous life. Visible in framed photographs covering every available surface despite their limited space. Images of Loretta vibrant and standing beside her, kindergarten students at science fairs, mother and daughter hiking mountain trails with matching wide smiles, holiday gatherings with church friends who had gradually disappeared as Loretta's illness consumed their social existence alongside their financial resources, each image preserving evidence of the woman slowly vanishing beneath hospital sheets and medical equipment, the stark contrast between photographed joy and present reality. Finally, shattering Shanice's carefully maintained composure. As she sank onto their worn couch, still clutching Dr. Lou's information packet with its impossible price tag attached to fragile possibility of recovery, her gaze eventually settling on her uniform for tomorrow, hanging on the bathroom door as tangible reminder of limited options, until silver business card on the kitchen counter caught evening light with almost supernatural gleam that seemed deliberate in its intrusion upon her despair, the embossed number beckoning with promise or perhaps threat, depending on perspective, as she finally retrieved her phone with trembling fingers, protective instincts warring with desperate practicality, while weighing unknown dangers of corporate entanglement against certain tragedy of continuing their current trajectory. Her decision crystallizing not through extensive deliberation, but sudden clarity that theoretical risks paled compared to imminent loss of the woman whose gentle breathing provided the only meaningful soundtrack to their small apartment. Her fingers dialing numbers precisely engraved on silver surface, while mentally cataloguing what this choice might cost beyond monetary compensation it would provide, each ring echoing like funeral bells, announcing death of former self, until Vivian's crisp voice answered without traditional greeting, simply stating she had expected Shanice's call sooner, the absence of triumphant satisfaction in her tone, suggesting genuine understanding of what such decision required, as they arranged meeting details with efficiency born of mutual recognition that once commenced. This path allowed no simple return to former existence regardless of outcome, Shanice disconnecting call with strange combination of dread and hope coursing through her veins as she moved to adjust her mother's medication dosage. Sunset fully faded now as lights from passing cars periodically illuminated photographs, preserving happier times they fought to reclaim through increasingly desperate measures. Morning sunlight fractured against the glass and steel exterior of Pierce Enterprises headquarters with diamond brilliance that momentarily blinded Shanice as she approached the towering structure dominating the downtown skyline. 70 stories of architectural ambition that housed financial operations affecting millions of lives globally while remaining physically and symbolically removed from the communities it claimed to serve. Her reflection in polished doors appearing suddenly foreign in the charcoal suit Vivian had arranged to be delivered with note, specifying appropriate corporate attire. The unfamiliar weight of tailored fabric against her skin, simultaneously empowering and restrictive. As she crossed the threshold into climate-controlled perfection, scented with subtle notes of citrus and cedar, security personnel discreetly assessing her appearance before confirming her identity against digital records and directing her toward executive elevators with deferential efficiency that contrasted sharply with the suspicious scrutiny she typically encountered in upscale establishments, the elevator ascending with such frictionless speed that her stomach lurched in protest, while numbers illuminated in rapid sequence until reaching the executive floor where doors parted to reveal an expansive reception area featuring museum-quality artwork and furnishings selected to communicate success without ostentation, Vivian awaiting her arrival with characteristic directness that provided welcome anchor amidst overwhelming sensory input of wealth beyond comprehension. Their brief great eating interrupted by commotion as Maxwell Pierce emerged from central conference room surrounded by attentive executives in virtually identical suits who parted before him like ceremonial guard, his animated conversation halting abruptly upon noticing Shanice with fleeting expression of genuine surprise. quickly masked by public persona of gracious benefactor as he crossed marble expanse with practiced charm to welcome her before assembled staff whose curious assessment carried undercurrents of calculation rather than warmth, his arm briefly encircling her shoulders for benefit of watching eyes, while whispering that his sister had neglected to mention this particular development with subtle emphasis, suggesting ongoing power struggles between siblings confirmed. Moments later, when Vivian smoothly extracted Shanice from Maxwell's theatrical welcome with pointed reminder of orientation schedule, tension between them evident in microscopic behaviors, invisible to casual observation, but glaringly apparent to someone who had spent years reading patron moods to maximize tips, Maxwell eventually releasing her with magnanimous gesture that nonetheless contained warning directed at his sister rather than Shanice herself, before returning to his entourage, who closed around him with practiced synchronicity while Vivian guided her through labyrinthine corridors, explaining organizational structure and introducing key personnel with efficiency that barely allowed processing of information flood until finally arriving at surprisingly modest office, bearing nameplate already installed with her details, privacy glass, instantly transitioning from transparent to opaque at touch of hidden control panel as Vivian quickly outlined security protocols and communication expectations before departing with uncharacteristic haste following cryptic message delivered to her sleek phone, leaving Shanice alone amidst corporate minimalism, featuring state-of-the-art technology including computer system, requiring biometric authentication already programmed to recognize her fingerprints in disconcertingly thorough preparation, orientation materials promising comprehensive training, while encouraging immediate review of foundation files, coincidentally organized in desktop folder, prominently displayed on monitor that beckoned with suspicious convenience, initial exploration revealing meticulous records of charitable initiatives, including cancer research funding, supposedly distributed to precisely documented recipients whose contact information Shanice impulsively verified during lunch break using her personal phone rather than company equipment, calls revealing disconnected numbers or confused individuals with no knowledge of substantial grants allegedly received months earlier, discrepancies forming disturbing pattern across multiple programs, suggesting systematic diversion of funds, supposedly helping people like her mother, while actually vanishing into financial labyrinths deliberately constructed to discourage casual investigation. Her growing unease at these discoveries paralleling increased awareness of constant surveillance from security cameras positioned throughout open office landscape and monitoring software tracking every keystroke on company devices, the gleaming corporate environment with its complimentary refreshment stations and ergonomic furnishings suddenly appearing less benevolent than initially perceived, as she recognized elegant facade concealing ruthless machinery designed to protect itself against threats including potentially her own investigation, the irony not lost that her desperate attempt to save her mother might position her against forces capable of destroying them both, with resources so vast that her previous concept of power dynamics seemed childishly inadequate by comparison. Twilight painted the Manhattan skyline in watercolor, hues of amber and violet visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Vivian Pierce's corner office where strategic positioning of furniture created deliberate sight, lines allowing constant awareness of approaching visitors while sophisticated soundproofing ensured conversations remained private despite glass walls, an architectural metaphor for transparency and concealment that Shanice now recognized as emblematic of corporate culture after 3 weeks navigating its labyrinthine power structures and unspoken hierarchies with increasingly nuanced understanding. Her initial impression of monolithic wealth gradually fracturing into recognition of complex internal divisions and competing agendas as Vivian systematically explained her suspicions regarding financial misconduct within the company's charitable foundations while simultaneously preparing tea with precise movements that struck Shanice as incongruously domestic within such sterile surroundings. the ritual apparently grounding Vivian, whose typical efficiency occasionally faltered when discussing Charles Whitmore, chief financial officer and her brother's closest confidant since undergraduate days at Harvard, where they had forged brotherhood through exclusive social clubs and shared ambitions that excluded Vivian despite her eventual ascension. Through merit rather than connection, historical dynamics still evident in present power distribution that positioned Charles with unfettered access to Maxwell, while Vivian remained perpetually secondary despite demonstrable superior financial acumen. Her systematic explanation of discrepancies between reported charitable contributions and actual disbursements, revealing sophisticated understanding of financial systems alongside genuine moral outrage that corporate philanthropy intended for societal benefit instead fueled private excess. Her demeanor shifting between clinical analysis when reviewing spreadsheet data and flashes of authentic indignation, suggesting principles transcending class boundaries, particularly evident as she described, discovering cancer research grants existing only on paper while her closest childhood friend died without access to experimental treatments their foundation supposedly funded, personal loss, transforming abstract financial impropriety into moral betrayal that Vivian had spent 18 months documenting through meticulous investigation, requiring technical expertise alongside strategic patience, qualities she recognized in Shanice, whose background in service industry had developed similar observational skills despite vastly different applications, their unlikely alliance bridging socioeconomic divide through shared recognition of injustice regardless of packaging, Vivian confessing inability to directly confront Maxwell, whose blind trust in Charles persisted despite occasional evidence of mismanagement, her brother dismissing her concerns as competitive jealousy rather than legitimate warnings based on evidence she steadily accumulated while maintaining professional facade, organizational dynamics, preventing her from accessing certain financial systems with UT alerting Charles, whose technological surveillance remained pervasive throughout corporate networks. Limitations. She hoped Shanice might circumvent through positions straddling administrative boundaries, with unique access privileges specifically designed at Vivian's insistence despite resistance from Human Resources Department. Unaccustomed to unconventional placement of new employees without traditional qualifications or connections, temporary power, Shanice now leveraged through systematic learning of corporate systems during day, while secretly investigating financial discrepancies during early mornings when skeleton crew provided minimal surveillance, discoveries increasingly confirming Vivian's suspicions that charitable foundations functioned primarily as tax shelters and personal slush funds rather than vehicles for social good. Despite genuine benefit provided to carefully selected recipients who unwittingly served as respectable cover for larger misappropriation, the complexity of systems designed to obscure financial trails indicating sophisticated criminal enterprise operating beneath veneer of corporate philanthropy. Revelations that should have confirmed Shanice's preconceptions about wealthy exploitation, yet paradoxically challenged simplistic narratives through Vivian's evident integrity, alongside discovery of multiple executives genuinely committed to ethical business practices, despite systemic pressures toward profit maximization. The emerging portrait of corporate culture, revealing not cartoon villains twirling metaphorical mustaches, but complex ecosystem where individual moral choices operated within structural constraints, Vivian herself embodying contradictions as architect of billion-dollar acquisitions who nonetheless kept photograph of Detroit housing project where she grew up prominently displayed alongside advanced economics degrees, her lived experience, bridging worlds that Shanice previously perceived as irreconcilably separated, yet now recognized as potentially connected through deliberate effort and strategic positioning that Vivian clearly hoped Shanice might eventually achieve. Given opportunity currently denied to most through systematic barriers she acknowledged with surprising candor during their increasingly frequent evening strategy sessions, subtle shifts in workplace dynamics, manifested first through minor inconveniences that individually appeared coincidental, yet collectively formed unmistakable pattern of deliberate obstruction, beginning with technological glitches affecting only systems Shanice regularly accessed, followed by meeting invitations arriving after gatherings commenced or disappearing entirely from her calendar despite confirmation receipts, culminating in quarterly reports mysteriously altering between her final review and executive presentation to display erroneous figures that undermined her credibility with mathematical precision targeting exactly those areas. Charles Whitmore supervised directly his performance during subsequent debriefing sessions, demonstrating masterful corporate theatre as he expressed concern over her apparent difficulties adjusting to professional environment with patronizing sympathy that implied fundamental incompatibility between her background and current position, while carefully avoiding actionable statements that might constitute discrimination. His surgical dismantling of her professional reputation, executed with precision suggesting extensive previous experience, destroying perceived threats through similar methodology, tactics evidently familiar to other executives who began maintaining professional distance after witnessing her public correction during Thursday investment committee meeting, where Charles questioned her understanding of basic financial principles despite her accurate identification of discrepancies in foundation allocations that retrospectively appeared deliberately planted to provoke her objection without sufficient supporting documentation, strategic humiliation resulting in perceptible cooling from colleagues previously willing to provide mentorship or inclusion in informal information networks essential for navigational survival within corporate ecosystem, increasingly finding herself isolated during lunch periods in the sleek employee cafeteria, where conversations abruptly shifted toward innocuous topics when she approached previously welcoming tables, whispered assessments of her qualifications and speculation regarding her relationship with either peer sibling following her through marble hallways and glass-walled conference rooms, with poisonous persistence that gradually eroded her confidence despite intellectual recognition of deliberate campaign against her, psychological warfare, intensifying proportionally with her continuing investigation into foundation discrepancies that revealed increasingly troubling patterns of financial misconduct, extending well beyond occasional accounting, irregularities into systematic fraud, operating across multiple charitable initiatives, with sophisticated concealment mechanisms indicating professional criminal enterprise rather than opportunistic embezzlement, Maxwell remaining perpetually unavailable despite multiple appointment requests. While Vivian found herself suddenly dispatched to oversee European acquisitions requiring extended absence, precisely when Shanice most needed strategic guidance, isolation, creating mounting pressure that culminated in sleepless Thursday, nights spent questioning whether continued resistance justified, increasing personal cost until systematic review of recently established Elliott Pierce Foundation records revealed unmistakable evidence of $17 million allegedly funding pediatric cancer treatment programs that corporate documentation claimed provided breakthrough therapies for 28 specific children whose parents offered testimonials included in promotional materials. Investigation into actual beneficiaries, revealing only 4 received promised treatments, while remaining funds disappeared through sophisticated network of shell companies, ultimately controlled by offshore accounts linked to Caribbean holdings where Charles maintained luxury property, featured in background of social media photographs he carelessly posted during supposed business conferences, the staggering scale of theft from initiatives specifically created to honor child. She had saved crystallizing previously abstract financial crimes into deeply personal betrayal that transformed her hesitation into resolute determination, despite increasingly obvious surveillance, including security personnel suddenly appearing whenever she worked late and unfamiliar maintenance workers servicing nearby offices during her lunch breaks. Corporate machinery mobilizing impressive resources to neutralize single administrative assistant, whose background they had clearly underestimated based on socio-economic assumptions about her capabilities and persistence. Corridor conversations among executive team members now shifting from dismissive assessment of her qualifications to concerned whispers regarding her continued investigation despite systematic obstruction. Charles himself abandoning subtle approach during Friday executive committee meeting, where he directly questioned her ongoing access to Foundation records with barely concealed hostility, suggesting recognition that standard intimidation tactics had proven insufficient against someone whose lifetime navigating systemic challenges had developed resilience beyond typical corporate experience. The escalating pressure revealing fundamental ruthlessness beneath polished corporate exterior, as resources typically devoted to billion-dollar acquisitions or competitor analysis now deployed against single employee whose determination to expose systematic exploitation of charitable initiatives designed to help vulnerable individuals like her own mother constituted existential threat to elaborate criminal enterprise operating beneath veneer of philanthropic beneficence. The irony not lost on Shanice, that organization publicly celebrating her moral courage, now mobilized against those same qualities when directed toward internal accountability rather than external publicity generating shareholder value. Subtle shifts in workplace dynamics manifested first through minor inconveniences that individually appeared coincidental yet collectively formed unmistakable pattern of deliberate obstruction, beginning with technological glitches affecting only systems Shanice regularly accessed, followed by meeting invitations arriving after gatherings commenced or disappearing entirely from her calendar despite confirmation receipts, culminating in quarterly reports mysteriously altering between her final review and executive presentation to display erroneous figures that undermined her credibility, with mathematical precision targeting exactly those areas. Charles Whitmore supervised directly, his performance during subsequent debriefing sessions demonstrating masterful corporate theater as he expressed concern over her apparent difficulties adjusting to professional environment with patronizing sympathy that implied fundamental incompatibility between her background and current position, while carefully avoiding actionable statements that might constitute discrimination. His surgical dismantling of her professional reputation, executed with precision, suggesting extensive previous experience destroying perceived threats through similar methodology, tactics evidently familiar to other executives who began maintaining professional distance after witnessing her public correction during Thursday investment committee meeting, where Charles questioned her understanding of basic financial principles despite her accurate identification of discrepancies in foundation allocations that retrospectively appeared deliberately planted to provoke her objection without sufficient supporting documentation. Strategic humiliation, resulting in perceptible cooling from colleagues previously willing to provide mentorship or inclusion in informal information networks, essential for navigational survival within corporate ecosystem, increasingly finding herself isolated during lunch, IADS, in the sleek employee cafeteria, where conversations abruptly shifted toward innocuous topics when she approached previously welcoming tables, whispered assessments of her qualifications and speculation regarding her relationship with either Pierce sibling following her through marble hallways and glass-walled conference rooms with poisonous persistence that gradually eroded her confidence, despite intellectual recognition of deliberate campaign against her, psychological warfare, intensifying proportionally with her continuing investigation into foundation discrepancies that revealed increasingly troubling patterns of financial misconduct, extending well beyond occasional accounting, irregularities into systematic fraud, operating across multiple charitable initiatives, with sophisticated concealment mechanisms indicating professional criminal enterprise rather than opportunistic embezzlement, Maxwell remaining perpetually unavailable despite multiple appointment requests, while Vivian found herself suddenly dispatched to oversee European acquisitions requiring extended absence precisely when Shanice most needed strategic guidance. Isolation creating mounting pressure that culminated in sleepless Thursday night, spent questioning whether continued resistance justified increasing personal cost until systematic review of recently established Elliott Pierce Foundation records revealed unmistakable evidence of $17 million allegedly funding pediatric cancer treatment programs that corporate documentation claimed provided breakthrough therapies for 28 specific children whose parents offered testimonials included in promotional materials. Investigation into actual beneficiaries, revealing only 4 received promised treatments, while remaining funds disappeared through sophisticated network of shell companies, ultimately controlled by offshore accounts linked to Caribbean holdings where Charles maintained luxury property, featured in background of social media photographs he carelessly posted during supposed business conferences. The staggering scale of theft from initiatives specifically created to honor child she had saved, crystallizing previously abstract financial crimes into deeply personal betrayal that transformed her hesitation into resolute determination. Despite increasingly obvious surveillance, including security personnel suddenly appearing whenever she worked late and unfamiliar maintenance workers servicing nearby offices during her lunch breaks, corporate machinery mobilizing impressive resources to neutralize single administrative assistant whose background they had clearly underestimated based on socio-economic assumptions about her capabilities and persistence. Corridor conversations among executive team members now shifting from dismissive assessment of her qualifications to concerned whispers regarding her continued investigation despite systematic obstruction. Charles himself abandoning subtle approach during Friday executive committee meeting, where he directly questioned her ongoing access to foundation records with barely concealed hostility, suggesting recognition that standard intimidation tactics had proven insufficient against someone whose lifetime navigating systemic challenges had developed resilience beyond typical corporate experience. The escalating pressure revealing fundamental ruthlessness beneath polished corporate exterior, as resources typically devoted to billion-dollar acquisitions or competitor analysis now deployed against single employee who determination to expose systematic exploitation of charitable initiatives designed to help vulnerable individuals like her own mother constituted existential threat to elaborate criminal enterprise operating beneath veneer of philanthropic beneficence. The irony not lost on Shanice, that organization publicly celebrating her moral courage, now mobilized against those same qualities when directed toward internal accountability rather than external publicity, generating shareholder value. Pre-dawn fog shrouded the empty playground where Shanice awaited Vivian's arrival with nervous vigilance, born from newfound awareness that safety existed merely as comforting illusion rather than reliable reality. Ordinary park bench suddenly transformed into strategic meeting location selected for absence of surveillance technology and meaningful distance from professional environments where conversations remained perpetually monitored through sophisticated systems disguised within everyday objects, her exhausted body protesting continued vigilance following 36 sleepless hours since confrontation with Charles revealed monstrous reality beneath corporate veneer, nervous system oscillating between hyper-alert paranoia regarding unmarked vehicles potentially containing observation teams and bone-deep fatigue threatening cognitive function necessary for strategic planning. Vivian's arrival in deliberately nondescript sedan, driven personally rather than relying on corporate transportation, representing appropriate security consciousness that provided minor reassurance regarding potential alliance, despite lingering trust issues inevitably following systematic deception characterizing corporate environment. Their hushed conversation proceeding with efficiency bordering on military precision as Shanice methodically recounted Charles's inadvertent confession regarding orchestrated accident targeting Elliot Pierce alongside financial crimes. Originally prompting investigation, Vivian's controlled reaction revealing preparation for financial misconduct allegations, yet genuine shock regarding attempted murder conspiracy targeting her nephew. Emotional response: humanizing previously enigmatic executive through momentary fracturing of professional facade before systematic problem-solving methodology, reasserted itself through rapid formulation of strategic response. Leveraging upcoming Foundation Gala, scheduled precisely 3 days hence when investors, media representatives, and regulatory officials would gather in single location, providing ideal audience for revelations specifically selected to trigger inevitable legal investigations while simultaneously protecting Shanice and vulnerable connections from potential retaliation through carefully structured public disclosure, generating sufficient external oversight to neutralize Charles's ability to implement threatened consequences. Detailed planning session lasting 97 minutes before concluding, with contingency protocols and communication systems utilizing encryption methods beyond standard corporate monitoring capabilities. Vivian departing with uncharacteristic physical contact through brief shoulder squeeze, conveying solidarity, transcending professional alliance into genuine human connection, reflecting shared recognition of moral imperatives beyond strategic considerations. Emotional complexity necessarily sidelined hours later when Shanice entered antiseptic hospital environment for morning visit with her mother, whose deteriorating condition manifested through alarming new symptoms, including respiratory distress requiring supplemental oxygen support, and concerning cardiac irregularities documented in bedside monitoring equipment. Medical team deliberately moderating urgency in their explanations while nonetheless communicating accelerated decline, requiring immediate intervention available exclusively through experimental protocols previously discussed, yet still financially unattainable. Despite Pierce Enterprises' salary representing substantial improvement over previous income streams, yet remaining insufficient for specialized treatment costs, urgency dramatically intensifying timeline for accountability operations against Charles, while simultaneously increasing vulnerability to potential retaliation given her mother's absolute dependence on institutional medical support, susceptible to external influence through financial leverage, stark hospital reality, contrasting sharply with corporate luxury. She navigated hours later during executive planning session for upcoming gala, where Charles dominated proceedings with characteristic authority, while occasionally directing meaningful glances communicating clear awareness of potential threat. She represented alongside confidence in leveraged power sufficient to ensure compliance, regardless of moral objections or evidentiary documentation, professional performance requiring superhuman compartmentalization as she recorded meeting minutes while simultaneously developing operational security for evidence, preservation, and disclosure strategy, exhaustion eventually necessitating caffeinated support during afternoon strategic pivot, taking her from corporate headquarters to familiar service entrance of Le Maison restaurant, where genuine emotional breakdown finally manifested through momentary collapse into Miguel's surprised arms as professional facades temporarily yielded to human necessity for authentic connection. Tearful reconciliation with former colleagues occurring in cramped break room, where fluorescent lighting and institutional green walls provided strange comfort through familiar sensory input, following weeks navigating unfamiliar corporate landscapes optimized for intimidation rather than functionality. Tentative initial responses gradually warming as she explained sanitized version of circumstances prompting unexpected return, alongside carefully calibrated request for assistance with specific aspects of accountability operation requiring particular skills developed through service industry experience, including observation capabilities, documentation techniques, and strategic coordination across multiple participants functioning cohesively despite absence of formal authority structures. Restaurant teams' enthusiastic response reflecting genuine community bonds, transcending temporary estrangement as they systematically organized implementation responsibilities according to individual capabilities, ranging from technological support through Miguel's unexpectedly sophisticated understanding of surveillance systems to emotional intelligence capabilities demonstrated by veteran servers whose careers depended upon reading subtle behavioral cues, frequently concealed beneath social pretense. Their collaborative planning session eventually interrupted by shift requirements, yet yielding comprehensive operational strategy, bridging socio-economic divisions through shared recognition of fundamental injustice transcending class boundaries. Implementation timeline necessarily accelerated through urgent text message from home health aide, reporting additional deterioration in her mother's condition, creating medical urgency paralleling operational timeline with synchronicity suggesting either cosmic irony or mathematical inevitability depending upon philosophical framework, the convergence of hospital rooms, restaurant service corridors, and executive offices within single 24-hour period, physically manifesting the unprecedented social mobility, characterizing her current existence as she navigated multiple worlds simultaneously while maintaining operational security necessary for successful implementation of accountability measures designed to create sufficient public awareness regarding Charles's criminal activities to neutralize threats against vulnerable connections while simultaneously preserving evidence required for subsequent legal proceedings following inevitable regulatory investigations, triggered through strategic information disclosure planned for gala event, where systems of power would briefly align with moral imperatives through carefully orchestrated revelation sequence. Crystal chandeliers suspended from gilt-edged ceilings cast diamond refractions across the Metropolitan Museum's Grand Hall, transformed for one evening into epicenter of philanthropic performance where billionaires and celebrities paraded compassion through designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos whose collective value could fund multiple pediatric cancer wards without troubling massive fortunes built upon systems perpetuating inequities their charitable contributions ostensibly addressed. Strategic irony not lost on Shanice, as she navigated the opulent gathering with professional detachment developed through years serving wealthy patrons while maintaining invisibility necessary for service industry survival. Though tonight, she moved through rarefied social strata, wearing custom gown provided by Vivian, whose understated elegance paradoxically attracted more attention than surrounding sartorial excesses through whispered recognition of her identity as heroic restaurant worker temporarily elevated through photogenic act of courage, celebrity status providing unique operational advantage as she implemented complex accountability protocols coordinated through wireless communication system disguised within seemingly decorative jewelry connecting team members, strategically positioned throughout massive space, Miguel supervising technical operations from secured maintenance area, where museum surveillance systems now displayed split-screen monitoring of principal targets alongside broadcast capabilities routed through independent servers, protecting against potential interference. Form R. Restaurant colleagues dispersed throughout gathering with disguised recording equipment, capturing conversations between financial regulators and potential whistleblowers previously contacted through anonymous channels, operational security maintained through elaborate cover identities, explaining their presence within exclusive gathering normally inaccessible to individuals from their socio-economic background, Vivian orchestrating executive-level coordination with practiced authority that maintained plausible deniability, while ensuring maximum effectiveness of strategically timed interventions, Charles himself maintaining center position within social constellations surrounding Maxwell Pierce, whose evident pride regarding Foundation launch remained untainted by awareness of fundamental corruption underlying philanthropic initiative, supposedly honoring son whose survival remained statistical anomaly within succession plans, the accumulated wealth and power within singular gathering, creating unprecedented opportunity for accountability through strategic revelation within environment where public reputation constituted primary currency, transcending even financial considerations given audience composition including regulatory authorities, media representatives, and social arbiters capable of bestowing or withholding crucial legitimacy necessary for continued operation within uppermost echelons of financial ecosystem, operational timeline, accelerating through silent coordination as Shanice implemented primary engagement sequence through seemingly casual interaction with Charles, whose confidence regarding her continued compliance manifested through condescending familiarity intended to communicate dominance within social hierarchy, her strategic conversational pivot guiding interaction towards seemingly private alcove, actually equipped with sophisticated broadcasting equipment, transmitting their exchange to screens, ostensibly displaying foundation promotional materials until precise moment when technical redirection transmitted their conversation throughout entire gathering, Charles initially maintaining practiced affability until precisely calibrated questions regarding specific financial transactions gradually transitioned toward discussion of Elliot's miraculous survival despite elaborate arrangements, ensuring structural failure appearing coincidental rather than deliberate, his growing discomfort evident only through microscopic behavioral indicators familiar to individuals accustomed to reading patron satisfaction through subtle cues, surveillance feeds, confirming Maxwell's gradually increasing attention toward conversation as broadcast audio became unmistakably identifiable as his trusted advisor's voice despite environmental acoustics designed to maintain conversational privacy. Charles eventually abandoning pretense entirely when Shanice systematically outlined evidence already secured within multiple independent repositories beyond corporate control, his practiced crisis management yielding to fundamental character failings as professional facade cracked under pressure, revealing underlying contempt for regulatory systems he had manipulated throughout decades-long financial career, dismissive commentary regarding easily influenced officials and fundamentally corrupt oversight mechanisms transitioning into explicit confirmation of specific embezzlement operations before culminating in catastrophic admission regarding orchestrated structural failure intended to eliminate succession obstacle, when Shanice deliberately triggered narcissistic outrage through questioning his technical competence in arranging accident, resulting in implementation failure, psychological manipulation succeeding beyond operational parameters, as Charles explicitly detailed engineering calculations regarding load-bearing requirements and material substitutions, ensuring eventual collapse while maintaining plausible deniability through appearance of maintenance oversight rather than deliberate sabotage, conversational momentum preventing recognition of strategic trap, until Maxwell himself physically entered conversational space, with expression of devastating comprehension replacing previous celebratory confidence, confrontation escalating through Charles's increasingly desperate attempts at damage control undermined by continuing broadcast, transmitting every denial and rationalization throughout gathered assembly, whose collective attention now focused entirely upon unfolding human drama, exceeding entertainment value of planned programming, security personnel responding to Vivian's discreet signal with professional efficiency that minimized disruption while ensuring comprehensive documentation of unfolding accountability process, operational SUB, success exceeding strategic projections as spontaneous disclosure from secondary participants, triggered by primary revelation created cascading transparency effect throughout organizational hierarchy, the opulent surroundings with their carefully curated aesthetic of compassionate philanthropy, providing perfect backdrop for authentic justice, transcending performative charity through genuine accountability, temporarily aligning systems of power with moral imperatives through strategic intervention, orchestrated by unlikely coalition, bridging socio-economic divisions through shared recognition of fundamental principles transcending class boundaries, Metropolitan Police officers arriving with unprecedented promptness, suggesting prior coordination through channels beyond standard operational parameters, while media representatives captured unfolding accountability spectacle with evident appreciation for ratings potential inherent within dramatic narrative combining attempted murder, financial fraud, and redemptive justice. Orchestrated by unlikely heroine whose trajectory from service industry, anonymity to corporate whistleblower contained irresistible narrative elements, ensuring widespread coverage transcending typical news cycles into potential serialized exploration of systematic issues underlying specific criminal activities. Sunlight filtered through vertical blinds, painting alternating stripes of gold and shadow across the private hospital suite, where medical technology worth millions hummed with reassuring efficiency surrounding Loretta Carter, whose frail body received cutting-edge immunotherapy through precisely calibrated delivery systems representing hope unavailable mere weeks earlier. The luxurious accommodation with its original artwork and panoramic views contrasting dramatically with crowded ward previously containing her hospital bed, yet maintaining unmistakable institutional purpose beneath aesthetic improvements. Shanice observing vital sign monitors with practiced vigilance developed through months of medical caregiving, while simultaneously reviewing foundation restructuring documentation requiring executive approval before implementation deadlines. Multitasking capabilities developed through service industry experience, proving unexpectedly valuable within corporate leadership role, unexpectedly thrust upon her through circumstances that transformed personal tragedy into systemic opportunity affecting countless lives beyond her immediate family circle. Her concentration interrupted by subtle knock preceding Maxwell Pierce's entrance, carrying simple bouquet of yellow daisies selected with evident consideration of recipient preferences rather than social expectations that might have preferences dictated more ostentatious floral arrangement, his demeanor displaying fundamental transformation from commanding corporate authority toward chastened humility, following revelations that systematically dismantled lifetime assumptions regarding trusted relationships and institutional integrity, tentative social navigation, reflecting genuine uncertainty, replacing previous confidence as he quietly asked permission to enter space rather than assuming access right. Conferred through wealth and status. Permission granted through Loretta's weak but welcoming gesture that transcended socio-economic boundaries through basic human connection. Maxwell carefully arranging flowers in simple vase before settling into visitor chair with uncharacteristic awareness of physical space occupied within room, primarily serving others' needs. Their conversation beginning with medical updates delivered through specialized vocabulary Shanice had mastered through necessity rather than formal education. Her evident expertise regarding treatment protocols eliciting visible respect from man whose professional existence typically prioritized executive summaries over technical details, discussion gradually transitioning toward foundation. Restructuring with Maxwell. Expressing genuine appreciation for comprehensive oversight mechanisms she had implemented. Ensuring transparency, transcending regulatory requirements toward fundamental accountability to communities served through philanthropic initiatives, organizational transformation extending beyond symbolic leadership appointment through systematic restructuring, transferring decision-making authority toward collaborative model, incorporating perspectives from populations typically relegated to passive recipient status within traditional charitable frameworks, specific initiatives including service industry support programs, guaranteeing living wages and healthcare access for restaurant workers, representing personal priority, reflecting her understanding of challenges facing communities typically invisible within co-operate philanthropic planning, despite providing essential services undergirding comfortable existence wealthy donors often took for granted. Maxwell listening with uncharacteristic receptivity as she outlined accountability structures, ensuring his considerable financial resources generated sustainable impact rather than temporary publicity advantages. His eventual response acknowledging transformative impact of recent events. Through explicit recognition that lifetime accumulating financial resources had created distance from fundamental realities experienced by majority of population, including individuals like Shanice, whose existence he would previously have overlooked despite remarkable capabilities demonstrated through crisis management skills, exceeding those of executives with prestigious educational credentials and extensive professional networks, his humility appearing genuine rather than performative, as he acknowledged specific instances where assumptions regarding merit and opportunity had systematically excluded perspectives essential for effective leadership within organizations supposedly serving public interest, their conversation reflecting mutual recognition that recent events had fundamentally altered personal trajectories through experiences transcending typical boundaries, separating their socio-economic realities. Shanice maintaining professional composure while acknowledging unprecedented opportunities created through foundation leadership role, while simultaneously establishing clear boundaries regarding community connections, she intended, maintaining despite inevitable social pressures, accompanying elevated professional position, specifically declining penthouse accommodation offered as employment benefit, while explaining importance of remaining within neighborhood, where community relationships provided essential support structures transcending financial considerations. Her insistence provoking visible reconsideration of assumptions regarding success and advancement, as Maxwell processed perspective fundamentally different from typical social climbing encountered throughout business career. Their conversation periodically interrupted by medical professionals whose respectful treatment of both Loretta and Shanice reflected institutional recognition that financial resources supporting premium care originated through personal connection with powerful benefactor rather than abstract charitable case designation, power dynamics visibly shifting through subtle interactions demonstrating evolving understanding regarding merit and authority, transcending traditional markers of status, Maxwell eventually departing with genuine promise to implement systemic changes extending beyond individual accommodation toward institutional transformation, addressing root causes rather than symptoms of inequality perpetuated through systems benefiting individuals like himself at expense of communities like those Shanice refused abandoning despite promotional opportunity, the hospital room temporarily containing representatives from dramatically different social worlds briefly united through shared recognition of human vulnerability, transcending financial resources or social status, Loretta's medical monitors displaying initial positive response to treatment previously available exclusively through financial resources, systematically denied to families like theirs until random intersection of lives through momentary crisis created opportunity for connection, transcending typical social boundaries, sunlight gradually shifting across institutional space, temporarily transformed through human connection into something approaching common ground, where mutual recognition created possibility for systemic change extending beyond individual circumstances toward genuine social transformation. Golden evening light streamed through newly installed floor-to-ceiling windows, transforming La Maison's interior through warm illumination that symbolized broader transparency, characterizing its organizational restructuring from traditional restaurant hierarchy toward innovative ownership model where employees collectively held 49% equity stake through foundation-sponsored program that Shanice had architected during sleepless nights. Between hospital visits and executive meetings, the physical space itself reflecting philosophical transformation through removal of barriers, formally separating kitchen staff from dining areas while maintaining aesthetic refinement that retained established clientele alongside new customers drawn through ethical business practices prominently featured in industry publications. Tonight's gathering representing official launch celebration for Restaurant Workers Initiative, providing healthcare benefits, educational opportunities and ownership pathways across 17 participating establishments with expansion plans, affecting thousands of service industry professionals traditionally excluded from wealth generation despite essential contributions to experiences commodified by owners. The assembled crowd reflecting unprecedented social integration as corporate executives and financial journalists mingled with line cooks and dishwashers, whose perspectives received equal consideration during panel discussions scheduled. Between celebratory moments, Shanice navigating complex social dynamics with practiced grace developed through months, simultaneously inhabiting multiple worlds while refusing compartmentalization that typically accompanied social advancement. Her professional attire, selected specifically to bridge worlds through subtle integration of serviceability with refinement rather than ostentatious displays, separating her from former colleagues who continued addressing her by first name, despite executive title reflecting genuine relationship maintenance, transcending hierarchical expectations, her attention momentarily shifting toward entrance, where Loretta arrived accompanied by Maxwell Pierce, whose protective hovering reflected genuine concern rather than performative charity, as he carefully monitored her oxygen levels while simultaneously managing his energetic son, whose behavioral transformation from privileged detachment toward enthusiastic engagement with diverse community members reflected intentional parenting choices implemented following values clarification precipitated by recent events. Loretta's medical improvement evident through independent mobility, requiring only occasional supplemental oxygen during physical exertion, treatment success, representing one tangible outcome among thousands, generated through restructured foundation operations, legitimately addressing medical access disparities through systemic interventions rather than selective individual charity perpetuating fundamental inequities. Her evident pride watching Shanice deliver welcoming remarks, reflecting maternal recognition that personal transformation extended beyond professional advancement toward authentic leadership, guided by values transcending socioeconomic boundaries. Audience attention, focusing completely during presentation, outlining measurable impact generated through 6 months operation under new leadership with transparent metrics, demonstrating genuine accountability to communities served rather than wealthy donors seeking reputation enhancement, statistical achievements briefly overshadowed by emotional significance when Maxwell approached microphone with uncharacteristic nervousness to publicly acknowledge systemic problems previously perpetuated through corporate practices, while emphasizing ongoing commitment toward genuine partnership, replacing traditional philanthropic models predicated upon power imbalances between benefactors and recipients, his heartfelt gratitude towards Shanice, expressing genuine recognition that her intervention transcended individual heroism towards systemic transformation, challenging fundamental assumptions regarding merit and opportunity within economic structures benefiting individuals like himself, while systematically excluding equally capable individuals lacking privileged access points. Formal program briefly interrupted when 4-year-old Elliot Pierce escaped parental supervision to launch himself enthusiastically toward Shanice, with delighted recognition transcending social boundaries through simple human connection, his spontaneous embrace generating emotional response throughout gathered assembly, as witnesses recognized symbolic completion of circular narrative, beginning with dramatic rescue and culminating in community celebration representing thousands of lives improved through systematic changes initiated through that singular moment of human connection. The transformed restaurant space physically embodying philosophical reconstruction, where artificial barriers between ownership and service dissolved through recognition of essential contributions, transcending traditional economic valuation. Miguel now operating as location manager, while completing business degree funded through educational initiative, while Vincent Hargrove contributed hospitality expertise across multiple locations following value realignment, replacing previous exploitation models with sustainable practices benefiting all participants rather than extracting maximum profit for minimum investment. Shanice momentarily pausing professional responsibilities to fully experience emotional significance of transformation surrounding her as Loretta engaged restaurant staff with natural teaching abilities reawakened through health restoration, while Maxwell demonstrated genuine listening skills developed through intentional practice, replacing previous authoritarian tendencies with collaborative approach, recognizing wisdom available through diverse perspectives, their collective presence within single gathering representing microcosm of broader social possibilities, where artificial barriers dissolved through recognition of fundamental human value, transcending traditional markers of status or achievement, the restaurant temporarily embodying potential for restructured relationships between capital and labor, through recognition that sustainable success acquired genuine partnership, rather than exploitation disguised through hierarchical systems, justifying disproportionate resource distribution, community gathering, representing not merely celebration of individual transformation, but recognition that systems designed for extraction and exploitation contained within themselves seeds for reconstruction, guided through intentional application of values prioritizing human dignity above artificial scarcity, perpetuated through myths regarding merit and opportunity. Shanice momentarily overwhelmed by emotional recognition that her instinctive leap toward falling child had initiated cascade effects, transforming countless lives through reconstruction of systems previously appearing immutable despite fundamental injustice inherent within their operation. The gathered community representing living testament that individual courage applied at precise pressure points within existing structures could indeed catalyze transformation, extending far beyond momentary intervention towards systemic reconstruction benefiting countless individuals through recognition of fundamental principles, transcending artificial boundaries between deserving and undeserving, perpetuated through myths, justifying disproportionate resource allocation, within supposedly meritocratic systems actually predicated upon privileged access rather than inherent capability.